Good morning, I'm Liz Terrell-Riley. Like she said, I'm from the Center of Effective Schools. I'm a training and consultant specialist there. Just want to start off by saying we tried the closed captioning. We were struggling to figure it out. We're sorry, we apologize, but it is being recorded. So as it's recorded, hopefully they can add the closed captions later. Oh, and I'm working today presenting with Laura and Jen. All right, so the Center for Effective Schools, we work on improving services for children with and at risk for developing emotional and behavioral disorders. And we do that by our consulting and our training that we hold. All right, our objectives. By the end of this session, you guys will be able to explain the critical components of MTSS frameworks for supporting and implementing restorative practices, describe specific restorative practices skills and their integration into existing PBIS schools, and identify feasible and effective methods for efficiently supporting schools in implementing restorative practices throughout coaching. All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about restorative practices. As we move forward, talk about our integration into MTSS with a case example, then what we did with that case, the training process and the planning, the barriers and challenges that we faced, the great success and solutions, and then the next steps where we were planning on going from there. We have a video. It's going to give you the overview of restorative practices, about prevention and intervention measures, but as we move forward, we'll go dive a little more into it. I'm hoping that it plays, fingers crossed.
Our world is changing at a breathtaking pace. Social patterns that have long characterized human life are changing dramatically around the globe, diminishing social bonds within families, schools, workplaces, and communities. But humans are hardwired to connect. Just as we need food, shelter, and clothing, we also need strong and meaningful relationships to thrive. With all this in mind, what is restorative practices? Restorative practices is an emerging social science that studies how to strengthen relationships between individuals and within communities. When put into practice, the effects are profound. In schools, students experience greater safety and sense of belonging, resulting in improved behavior, less bullying, and less violence. In workplaces, leaders facilitate direct communication among staff and address conflict as it arises. The result is higher performance, greater accountability, and effective collaboration. In criminal justice, new options allow victims and offenders, friends and family, to repair the emotional harm caused by crime. Throughout our neighborhoods, restorative practices give regular people more voice in the issues that matter most. In a nutshell, restorative practices is the science of relationships and community. Your individual daily interactions have a big impact on the world around you, at your job, with young people, and throughout your community. How we relate matters. This video was brought to you by the International Institute for Restorative Practices. To learn more, attend our flagship event, Basic Restorative Practices, enroll in a graduate course, or join us at a world conference.
So restorative practices, it helps your schools build relationships, and it will work on empowering the community as far as helping students take responsibility for their behavior and how it affects others. All right, so what is restorative practices? It's based off the restorative justice model. And so in that model, they have you build relationships, and in building those relationships, you hope to work on that connectedness with other people. And then in doing that, you want to repair the harm that may have been done by violence or crime or something like that. That's restorative justice, but it's turned into restorative practices. All right, so why do we use restorative practices? So we want to strengthen relationships and build that interpersonal connectedness together. And then by doing that, it's our hope that we kind of push down the blame and the punishment. And as we push down the blame and the punishment, we work on strategies that focus on effectively changing students' behaviors and kind of working on the student motivation as well. the restorative approach. So the restorative approach is based off of these 3 philosophies. And if you want to kind of do restorative practices, you got to understand these 3 ideas first. The first one is moving from a punitive to a restorative approach, which we kind of all understand and agree with. The second one is the social discipline view. And with that, it's teachers realizing that when they take a restorative approach, their restorative approach is going to help students make better decisions, and motivate them to do the right thing. And the last one is the fair process. And the fair process is just basically tying it all together and making sure that restorative practices is effective. All right, so the social discipline window. On the vertical side, up and down, we have the control, and then horizontally, we have support. As we move up in control, it goes from low to high, and that's the same thing with the support on the bottom. In the first box, the 4, this is where we are doing high support and low control. This is where you end up doing things for the students. They kind of are permissive, they're not really, learned helplessness, kind of everything is done for them. All right, this is where you're doing nothing. This is low control and low support. So there's no support for the students, no support. There's no control, you're not setting those expectations, there's nothing there for them. The punitive, we've all had a punitive teacher, or at least I can think of one I've had right now. This is where you're kind of being told what to do, the expectations are set, this is what needs to be done, but there's no real support on how to do it. There's no place to learn from mistakes or anything like that. And then last, where we want to be, is with the students, and we kind of, not even just students, people in general, we want to do it together, come up with the social norms and the restorative practices. It has both the high support and the high control. So you're setting those expectations, but you're also helping the students reach those expectations as well. So the fair process, this is where everyone together is coming up with the expectation as a community on agreed upon values and norms. So there's 3 parts to fair process. There's engagement, explanation, and expectation clarity. Engagement is just everyone being involved and everyone having an opportunity to say their perspectives. With explanation, that's just the transparency of why the decisions are made. So everyone is working together to make these decisions and we know why they're being made. And then the last part is the expectation clarity. And that's when new things are happening or things like that. We make sure everyone understands why it's happening, and then we provide ways for people to understand. The goals of restorative practices in school. So we want to create an inclusive school climate, and rather than a punitive one, and decrease suspensions or exclusionary discipline in general. So, and by doing that, we want to hold the youth accountable for their actions of what they're doing. And we do that through making sure that we're making amends and improving the harm. And the last one is to create opportunities for learning. And so we want to make sure that the students understand how their behavior impacts other people. So we talked about restorative practice in general. Now we want to make sure we're talking about restorative practices of schools. So I think we've all seen these before, the trauma-informed practices, PBIS, of course, and then social emotional learning. All 3 of these are kind of working on challenging behaviors, addressing challenging behaviors that we see in our students. And I know a lot of people are trying to do that right now. And what we do with restorative practices is not a framework, a new framework or anything like that. It's kind of just follows along with these same ideals and fits into where all of these things where it needs to. So, restorative practices has 4 parts: effective statements, effective questions, conferences, and circles. So effective statements, I feel like we've all heard those I feel statements. I feel hurt when you do blah, 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 blah. And then effective questions is more to help the students or people understand how their behavior affects other people. Conferences are based on building that conflict resolution and doing it in a way where it's healthy for the students and no one feels attacked or harmed. There are many types of circles. I'm sure some of you run circles in your classrooms. There's building relationship circles. There's different, coming back into the room circles, there's a million of them. All right, so that's a restorative practice overview. Moving on to integrating restorative practices and PBIS. All right, so PBIS on its own is to work on, addressing those challenging behaviors and teaching expectations. So restorative practices can be implemented within each stage of that. So if we look at Tier 1, the restorative practices, we can work on community building of circles. And then we can also do like the other type of circles where those are restorative circles. As we move on to Tier 2 is more those conferences that we were talking about before, where we're conflict resolution and trying to rebuild those relationships. And then Tier 3, it's restorative practice, and this is a different type of circle where they're talking about the re-entry, coming back into the classroom and things like that. So PBIS and restorative practices in its core are based off of the three things. Inappropriate behavior is a learning opportunity. We want to make sure that corrective and instructional consequences teach the desired behavior and understand the reason for the student's undesired behavior. All right, so this is our case study. We're working with a school district, and we did these three things with them. So we provided district-wide PBIS consultation. We also established restorative practices. They already were doing it at one school, and so then we offered support in one of the others, or the 6 other schools out of the 7 elementary schools. And then we developed a program-wide PBIS at their preschool. So the demographics. So this is a huge district. It serves about 64,000 students and covers about 98 square miles. They have 7 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, 1 high school, and then of course the district preschool. It's a very diverse community. So in one part of the school district, there's it's an urban community that's more like the city, and then in the other part of the community, it's like, we'll say rural farms where it's, it's not the opposite. And so in each parts of those cities, they have different and unique needs. Oh, and that moves on to the training process and planning.
All right, I made it up the stairs without tripping, so victory number 1. My name's Jen, and I am a training consulting specialist with the Center for Effective Schools, and we are going to talk to you now about kind of what we did with this school district, and then how we talked them through and brought them through the training process, and what that looked like over the course of the year, who we involved, and then how we did it. So kind of the roadmap, if you will, of what we did and then how we rolled this out. We did this during the 22 to 23 school year last year, the training process, and we started off at the beginning of the school year with brief overviews about what restorative practices are and how it works and how it looks like within the buildings. We did 2 one-hour overview trainings at the beginning of the year to a auditorium, basically. So kind of like what Dr. McDaniel was talking about this morning, thinking about, okay, we're talking at a very large group of people versus trying to engage them in these activities that we would normally want to do to kind of drive home some of that learning process. We did build in some activities that I'll talk about in a little bit, but all the staff was in attendance here. They all also tried to hide a little bit from us and then stay all the way to the back of the auditorium, as many of you may recognize as the layout in PDs in your buildings. It's all, again, very didactic with a few brief activities. Again, we only had a short period of time and a ton of people in some interesting spaces to do training in. Then we started with a pilot group where we did training workshops with the participants that we were going to try to move this forward with. They included the administrators. Each school that was involved identified a coach and pilot staff for each school that were going to begin to implement this outside of the generalized trainings that we got. And then we designed these workshops to be half-day skill-building workshops, so less of the more, I'm standing up and talking at you, and more of the, we're gonna dive deeper into what these practices look like and how they work. And then we paired that with a coaching PLC group, where we met planned to meet monthly to follow up with the coaches to see how things were going in their buildings, to discuss what things looked like in practice for them, and then to talk through what coaching actually looks like and how to effectively support and coach the staff that they were identified in looking at what those restorative practices, the skills that we taught them, how it was actually working in practice. So a little bit about the pilot group participants. The administrators included the principals and also the director of special ed came to our trainings as well. The coaches consisted primarily of either the school psychologists, we had a speech language professional, and then we actually had a couple teachers. We had a coach-teacher pair where they both were coaches and then they were both the coached staff as well. So they coached each other as peer coaches. And then the staff that were involved were mostly teachers with some other roles that were involved as well. It's just to give you kind of a snapshot. We had about, I'd say 30-ish planned to participate with some varying levels of attendance throughout the workshops. A little bit about where we got some of the material from that we put together as part of the training process. Obviously, we didn't create restorative practices, so I wanted to give you a resource of where we pulled things from. The Chicago Public Schools Restorative Practices Guide and Toolkit is a great resource to look at. And then we also use some things from the Oakland Unified School District Restorative Justice Implementation Guide as well. So let's take a look at what we kind of covered in each of those training days, what we covered in the training workshops, and then the coaching PLC process. So the first training day was in September of 2022, and this was again an all-staff training. And I just put some screenshots up of what we kind of covered during this first one. This was the intro to what restorative practices is, how it really aligns with their existing approaches to behavior management. A lot of these schools were in the process of actively implementing PBIS as well, so we aimed to try to help them think about how to integrate those things. We also listed a few examples of restorative practices and then how to apply that and what the adult impact looks like in the classroom. So we covered just what Liz talked about a minute ago about the different restorative practices that can be implemented in the classroom, the affective statements and questions, the conferences, the circles, and then we did manage to build in an activity with everyone involving the four corners of the room where we gave them a picture example of what each of those kind of four quadrants from the social discipline window look like, and then asked participants to describe what it looks like, what it might feel like as a student and as a staff, to get them kind of thinking about where they might land on this social discipline window and thinking about what might change if they adjust to a more restorative approach. The second full training day was in November, where we started diving a little bit deeper into some of the more specific pieces of restorative practices, thinking about why a restorative approach is really important, and then talking more about the affective statements and affective language. You can see some examples up here. We really talked more specifically about what it means to use empathetic listening, affective statements, those questions, along with the examples you can see listed there, versus the tends to be negative kind of language and speech that we might use, what did you do, or why would you do that, and trying to avoid some of those things. So getting more specifically into what each of the restorative practices we were going to do with the coaching PLC might look like more specifically. So it's kind of a snapshot. So those are the two full day trainings. This I recognize is very tiny, you won't be able to read it, but this was our planned timeline for the year. With our PLC group, we were planning on having the workshops throughout, starting in January, because you can, from the last slide you saw, our last full day training, or full staff training, excuse me, was in November. So we started this process in January, where we started thinking about what these workshops looked like and then how we were going to build those out. So the skill building workshops that we had planned, we planned 4 of them. The first one was affective language, and it was scheduled for January with the whole pilot group. Proactive circles, we planned for February, also again with the pilot group. And then we did restorative and logical consequences as part of the workshop as well, and planned for March. And then our final one was planned for May or June, and it was intended to be for the administrators only, diving more into the more restorative conferences, like how to effectively get students back into the classroom after an incident has occurred. recognizing that that doesn't typically happen within a classroom where the teacher would be responsible for doing that. So just a little bit, here's some snapshots of what we did. At the first workshop, we immediately started off by telling everyone, you're going to be uncomfortable with us because we put the whole room in a circle. We didn't stand up and do slides like this. We had no slides at all, nothing. It was just, we had a packet of paper, we were all in a circle, and we were sitting around discussing these things and then practicing these pieces. So we immediately told them, you're gonna have to get up, kind of move around. We did a lot of skill building activities around what affective language is, how to use it, how to practice using it. And one of the things that we saw in the process that we did was that they struggled a little bit with actually doing it, even with their colleagues when they were in a comfortable, safe space. So they were able to recognize that having that practice, that actual in-person coordinating and then practicing it with each other was very valuable for them. So we talked about the affective language, the empathetic listening, and then what an affective statement means. The next one was proactive circles that we plan to do. We talked them through what a circle looks like, what a proactive circle looks like, what the benefits of it are, how it really supports building that community and building those relationships within the classroom. And then we had them practice many different kinds of circles in many different kinds of ways as participants, so they could kind of get a sense of what this was, how it worked, and how they could use it in their classrooms. We also included a lot of tips about how to run the circles, things to think about as they're planning for them, and then again, heavily emphasizing that the planning part is just as important as implementing it in the way that it's designed to be implemented. The last workshop that we did with the pilot group was the Restorative and Logical Consequences workshop, where we again started talking about the connection between a behavior and a consequence, and then trying to remove the punitive part of that consequence and replacing it with something that's more restorative and logical, helping them think through, okay, a situation happened, how do we start to repair the relationship between whoever was involved in the situation? So diving more into the affective questions and thinking about what does it mean to help support a student in thinking through, okay, what happened, who was affected, what can we do to take steps to make it right or to make it better, and then what do we do next? And talking them through what this looks like and how they can use this with their students in a classroom in a more minor situation. We also built in a discussion around what it means to have logical consequences and what that actually looks like. It's not necessarily just a list of consequences that you have that you can like pull from, but thinking about what consequences are meaningful, but not trying to be overly punitive and negative in that response. One of the things that we made pretty clear in this one was that consequences can be still delivered even if they're intended to be punitive, but if the student is part of the process in thinking about, okay, what can I do to make this right? If they decide, I'm going to write an essay about what I did incorrectly and then read it to you, that may sound punitive if we gave that to them as the assignment to do, but having them identify this is what I want to do to make this right is something that's a really important part of this process. The last workshop that we had planned was around restorative conferences, which was intended just for the administrators, and again, that more significant conflict resolution support, making that kind of consistent from across the schools and having it work within their existing MTSS support and what that might look like. That might have included supporting students in restorative actions, what that looks like before returning to the classroom, or if necessary, facilitating conferences between students. We wanted this workshop to be intended just for the administrators, obviously, because when you try to do this between students, it can get really tricky, and especially when some other consequences might be involved, like if a student was suspended for any reason because of their challenging behavior, we wanted the administrators to be involved in this. So those are the workshops that we put together that we had planned to deliver. Laura will talk about what actually happened when we went through all of those things, but you can see what we planned. Then for the coaching PLC process, we wanted to really integrate this into best coaching practices. It's not enough to just give you information and then hope that it sticks and lands and then happens in the way that you intend it to, kind of like the game of telephone. Like, you say something and by the time it gets to where it's supposed to be, it's a little bit garbled and a little bit not maybe making as much sense anymore, or missing some of the more key steps for the fidelity of implementation that we're looking for. So we started off with the larger group by explaining the theory, and then we had those workshop discussions with the coaching pilot group that we worked with, showing them examples of good practice. We were doing it with them. We were demonstrating what circles looked like by leading a circle with them, and then having them practice leading a circle with the other participants as well. And then as part of the coaching process, the staff that were identified to be coached were then to go practice those things in their classroom and then meet with their identified coach to talk through how successful was it? Did I have any barriers? Did anything happen? And in some situations, we're able to observe what's going on and then how that all works. So the idea is that we wanted to give performance feedback. So by doing that, we developed this restorative practices coaching model specifically for this district. We have the coach and we have the teacher in an assigned partnership. They attended all the trainings. The coach may do observations if it's appropriate. Obviously, you can't always predict when things are going to happen. But if you know you're going to be running a community circle, that's a great time to have someone come in and observe how you're doing that. And then the teachers are supposed to implement those skills and then conduct a self-assessment, because again, some of these situations pop up when we're not able to predict them, so we can't always schedule when am I going to assess how I'm building these relationships with my students and using these practices. And then the plan was for them to meet for feedback and support. We developed these skill reflection sheets for each of the practices that we worked on during these workshops. So for the empathetic listening, kind of what that looks like, how it works, and then we added pieces on the bottom where the staff could identify where are my strengths here? What do I need for support? And then what am I going to try next? And each of these self-reflection sheets had each of those components on it. What is it? Examples of what it looks like, and then kind of reflecting on where am I in this practice. We did this for the empathetic listening, affective statements, proactive circles, and then restorative conversations. Not the conferences, the restorative conversations. Just there's an issue with a student, talking through what that looks like. We also developed some coaching observations as well that this applied mostly just to the proactive circles, because that's one of the things that you can plan ahead for. And you can plan for, when am I going to have a community building circle in my classroom? I'm going to invite my coach to come and watch how I do this, and then we'll talk about it after. And we developed this observation using some resources that I had shared with you already, but kind of making it tailored to the process that we were describing to them and what that looks like. So what the critical features are, if the coach saw it, if they didn't see it, or if it wasn't applicable because it couldn't be done for one reason or another, and then some notes and comments. And then the plan was for them to meet and discuss that afterwards. And then finally, the last piece of this was the coaching PLC meetings. These were designed, again, they were scheduled on a monthly basis, planning to follow each of the workshops to talk through, okay, now how do I coach these practices to the people that I've been assigned to support this with? How do I coach this? How do I help them work through this? What do I talk about? What does good coaching practice look like? Do you have questions about the skills we discussed at the trainings? So the staff that were identified weren't included in this, but all of the coaches were included in this. And we did this remotely over Teams to try to accommodate the fact that, again, we were pulling from many different buildings to do this, and then just having these conversations, primarily about what coaching looks like, what the skills might look like, what you might see in the classrooms, and then talking them through how to support their staff as they are implementing these restorative practices, with the ultimate goal of them developing those skills. So before we get into the barriers and challenges and kind of like what happened, our plan was to help support this district in carrying this through from, okay, we gave all the staff a broad overview, now we're looking at how do we actually work with the coaches to do this in the small pilot group, and then what happens after that. So I'm going to turn this over to Laura to talk us through some of the barriers and challenges, and some successes and solutions, and then what we're going to do next. And then we'll have some time for questions at the end as well. Hopefully I don't fall off.
Okay. All right, so I'm Laura Rutherford, and I'm going to talk a little bit to what Jen alluded to, is that this wasn't smooth sailing. This was not like we have, best laid plans. We have great plans, but they didn't always work out the way we had hoped. So there were several challenges that we encountered with this as we went through. So the first one is you work in schools, and scheduling and calendars logistics are a nightmare. And so we had many issues, and I'll talk a little bit in the next slide more specifically about what those calendar issues are, but we had a lot of scheduling conflicts. We did the first 2 trainings on their PD days because it was all staff. So that was relatively easy. We were on the calendar. That was smooth sailing. But we decided for the other ones that we couldn't use PD days because a lot of the people who we wanted to be in the training were people who typically run PDs for the district. And so we couldn't pull them. So we actually just did it on like a random day, which means they had to get substitutes and all kinds of stuff, which, as you all know, is not easy to do. So we had a lot of scheduling calendar conflicts. We had this district suffers from what I think many districts do, which is the more the better, right? So they're like, let's just layer on and do more things. And so they had a lot of initiatives happening all at the same time. And so they had a lot of things happening. So when we say limited buy-in, what I mean is that there's a lot of competing priorities going on in this district, and for some schools, this was a priority. And for other schools, other things were a priority. And so we had some schools who were like, we're gonna work at this and make it happen, and this is amazing. And we had other schools who were like, look, this is great and all, but we have 50 other things we have to get to. So that was a bit of a challenge because this was a district initiative, and the assistant superintendent, the superintendent said this is happening this year. So it was happening, and there was no negotiating about it. The way it happened, we were very open to suggestions, but the fact that this was a priority was dictated by the district, but that I could tell for some schools there were other priorities happening. I don't know if Jen spoke about this, but I met with each of the principals and I said, I want you to pick a coach, at least one coach from your school, and at least one teacher from your school. It could be more. And it doesn't have to be a teacher staff. It has someone who's going to be able to implement these practices. And I want them to already be doing this. Like, don't send me the people who hate kids. I don't want that. That's not going to help, right? I want the ones who are yelling at kids all the time. I want the ones who are already naturally restorative. The reason why is they'll be more into buy-in. They'll be really into this. They'll be able to support. And then they can help then coach other teachers at this because they're already good at it. And everyone's like, that's a great idea. Yeah, we'll do that. And then you could tell, and then we said whoever the coach is has to be someone who can observe in a classroom and support people and has time to meet with people. So please don't pull in people who have 100 other things to do. And so when we said that was what our ask is, but then I said, but it's up to you, principals, pick who you want. And so some principals were like, I hear you, and I picked my best teachers, and I picked the school psychologists and the social workers, and these are the coaches, and it's gonna be amazing. And some people were like, this one is very good. She does everything in our building. She's gonna be the coach. And I'm like, she does everything in your building. She's gonna do that. Or we got teachers who were told they had to do it, as opposed to being asked to do it. So that part was a little bit of a challenge. Some schools sent a lot of people to the training, and some people were like, you said I need one coach and one teacher, here's one coach and one teacher. And so we had varying levels there, I think, of who we picked. I think overall we ended up with really great teachers who really are naturally restorative, so we were lucky in that way. But there were some tricky pieces with that part of it. And then this district is not great communicators, I will say. So they struggle a little bit with, there was a lot of communication problems between district leaderships and principals, as I'll talk about in a minute. So there was like messaging that we would go to the assistant superintendent and the special ed director who we work very closely with, and we'd be like, tell all the principals X. And then we would have a meeting and the principals were like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then we would find out it's like buried in an email, like in an attachment. And I was like, well, nobody reads your attachments. So there was that challenge. And then we had issues with principals communicating with staff. So we but very rarely communicated directly to the coaches or directly to the teachers. We relied on the principals to do that. We had implied that we would be happy to get everybody's emails and do it directly, but that didn't happen, communication issues. And so sometimes we would give a directive or whatever to the principals and like, please tell your staff X, and then they didn't. So like a key thing was many people came to the wrong location one day for a training because they moved it and no one told them that it was not in the place that we were last time. So like that kind of thing. Then people come to your training and they're pissed off and stressed and whatever. And so you're like, sorry, let's do a circle. So that's like not ideal. So that was a challenge, I would say, that we definitely had between, communication was an issue. So this is what Jen was alluding to. This was our plan. Remember Jen laid out a plan? This was like our beautiful plan. We're going to see you every month and we're going to have a thing, right? So none of this happened. So just warning, none of this happened. It was all supposed to be a half-day training. So our January training, you'll like this, was scheduled for December, and then they literally forgot about it. Like, this was a buried in an email situation. So we like met with them a week before, and we're like, hi everybody, we're so excited to see you next week. And they're like, what? What are you talking about? We're like, we're coming next week for the training. And they're like, you could see like the deer in the headlights. They were all like, and then we were like, well, okay, no, not December. We'll see you in January. Is that better? And they were like, yeah. So that did happen, but we got pushed back a month. So it happened in January. And then we were going to have the second half-day training in February for everyone. And that got rescheduled because it snowed. It was a huge snowstorm. And so it got canceled. And then we were like, okay, we'll take the March one, we'll do that March one, and we'll just make it a full day. Is that better? Like, we're just getting subs anyway. You might as well just do a full day instead. Yes, that's much better. And so we planned for that, and we were combining it, and then it got canceled in March, again, for weather. So frustrating. Stupid snow. And then we scheduled it in April, and this has never happened to me in my entire career, ever. They canceled because it was too nice outside. Okay, so that sounds ridiculous, and I love that story so much, but really what happened is it was scheduled for right after like the Easter break. It was like the 2 days after Easter break, and it was like that time, it was like 70 degrees out, it was beautiful out, so everybody called out. They couldn't get subs, they couldn't get anyone. They were like, we can't have subs, like we have to cancel. And they didn't cancel until we were there. Like we were like ready to go, and they're like, we think we should call it off. And I was like, but we said, look, we can still do it. But I was like, no, because if people aren't gonna come, or they're gonna be mad, right? Because we made principals come, and principals were like, I can't leave my school if I have no staff. I don't have enough coverage, like I need to be there. So we said, no. We don't want to do this, but we're going to do it in May. So we did do a full day in May, but you think about training in May, school's over, they don't want to be there. So that was, they were very lovely and nice, but that got put off. And then the restorative conferences in May and June, we decided instead of doing the training together, because they wanted to do it at the end of June, we decided we would meet with each principal individually and talk about needs instead, because we knew that in this district, there's a lot of like, but my school is so different and special than your school. And like, I think the issue is they are very different schools. They are very different schools. But everybody thinks they're like their own special butterfly. So we're like, if we bring them together, they're gonna be like, well, we don't have problems like they do at this school, or they don't understand what it's like in our school. So like, we just decided to meet with them separately. So we did cover the content in a way, but we didn't do it the way we originally planned. So nothing went the way we wanted to, but yet we did so much stuff. So I will say those are the barriers and challenges. Things don't go as you planned. your goal, if you ever want to implement, is to think flexibly and, make changes and do things as we went. Now, so one of the challenges that I didn't actually mention is that our plan, like Jen mentioned, is that after every training, we were going to meet once a month about the skills and how we're going to coach and whatever. But it's like, we had one training in January, so we did meet a couple months, and then we're like, well, we have to cancel the next one because we haven't had a training. We have to cancel the next one because we haven't had a training. And then we met in May, and we're like, well, let's meet one time. So we didn't get to meet with the coaches nearly as often as we were hoping, because the timing didn't work. And again, it's after school time. They were giving up. They were getting paid, but nobody really wants to give up their time, especially if we didn't have anything new to talk about. So that coaching PLC didn't really happen the way we were really hoping it would. But we did have a lot of successes. So I do want to say that even though we had a lot of stuff did not go right, we did have a lot of successes. So at every training, at least every school had a teacher and a coach representative at every training. Sometimes not everyone could be there. There were times where people were out sick, or people got stuck at a school, or the principal could only come, a little bit. But we had everyone there. People love this training. I mean, I was very nervous when we're not going to have slides. I need my slides. But no, we're going to do it in a circle. They loved it. Nobody loves the being put on the spot and doing things that we made the activities fun, and they really benefited, and we got really positive feedback. So that they really enjoyed the training piece. We did ask all principals to come, and I think all of them came for at least parts of the training, a half a day or part of it. And everyone had their follow-up meeting, so they did come to a follow-up. So even if they couldn't make it the whole day or part of the day, they did come to follow-up just meetings and discussions to talk about it, which I think was really great, because that was a tricky part, because of the issues about being pulled out of the schools. These schools don't have assistant principals or anything like that, so they're the only administrator. So when they're not there, and I also I'm like, oh, and I'm taking your other huge people in your school, your social workers, your school psychs, there's nobody left, right? So they were so the fact that many of them came was really a huge plus. And then all schools, when we talked to them at the end of last year, and I'll talk about that next, they are all moving forward with rolling out. So they weren't check that off the box, we don't have to do anymore. They all have a plan to implement further. So the momentum really was what we were hoping it would be, to start, build momentum, do a pilot, and then move on. Other successes, when we did, generally the feedback was that the trainees really believe that there is a need for restorative practices in schools. They said, we can really use this. This could be really beneficial. They like the idea of this pilot process where we would build up in-house expertise to then turn around, train other people, as opposed to constantly needing our support to train people. So they like the idea of being able to train a few people in their building who could then be leaders in this moving forward. And then we know there's so much initiatives and stuff going on, so we decided if we start small with the people who are more excited about it, then they can build momentum and show this is really effective. Maybe you want to try this next, type of thing. So that was really, we felt a really good match for this. So there were a lot of great successes for this. We did, after the training, do a survey for all the people who attended. One, to get feedback about the training, but really the focus was on what next? What do you think would be helpful for next step? So we asked questions about how should we plan to roll this out further? What do you think a plan for coaching could be that would be more feasible and logistic? What kind of supports can we give you from us to make this happen next year? We don't want to be yay, we trained a pilot and bye now. So what can we do to help you? And then we asked, what are the biggest barriers to implementation next year you think will happen, and what could be potential solutions to that? One of the feedbacks we got from some schools and some people, from participants, some coaches and teachers said, the district's always rolling things out or putting things in place, and we have to help implement it, but nobody ever asks us how we should do this, how we should do it. And I was oh my gosh, fair process. This is it. This is, right? Because the idea of fair process is that people don't like when things happen to them. They want to be part of it. And even if they don't get to make the decision, right? It's not a democracy. I can't like go in and be like, everyone vote. Can we leave early on Friday? Raise your hand. Like, it's not like that. But it's like, we have to make decisions, and let's talk about it, and let me give your input, and I'll consider that, and I'll let you know why decisions are made, right? And I was like, this is fair process. You're not getting fair process at your school, and you want that. So like, we're like, okay, we can't promise you that like, well, people will listen or whatever, but we're going to take your feedback, and we are going to take that to your principals, and we make a plan. We're going to consider what you said here. So it's not just going to be, you know, all up to the principal to do this. And so we think that was a really good strategy. And they were the ones who came up with it. They were the ones like, is there any way we can give input? And we're like, yes. So I think this was a good way that we can kind of practice what we preach. Like we're saying we should do restorative practices, well, we should engage in that as well. So our next steps here for our teams is after this summer, we met with all of the principals at the 6 schools, and we said, here's your survey results, and here's what they're recommending that we do, and then let's talk about it. The district was amazing about this. They're like, our priority is that we implement restorative practices, but how each school does it is completely up to you and them to figure out. We're not going to mandate anything. We're not going to say anything. And they actually wrote in their district plan, the schools are going to make a plan, right? And that's the district's plan is it's going to happen, but how it happens is going to be different. So when we met with the schools, the 6 schools, we said, you know, here's 2 options that we think it could be, but we also, there can be other options too, so let's talk about it. But the 2 options really were, and this is what they picked from, or they all selected, was either, we're ready to do this. We feel like we already have a good foundation for this, we kind of already know what we're doing, we're gonna roll this out to all of our staff. And how we're gonna do that is gonna differ, and so we are, you know, we're going to go either to, you know, in staff meetings. Some people have other meetings they wanted to roll it out in. They want to kind of talk about the ideas, but they said we're going to do maybe brief trainings in their staff meetings. They're going to, some of them have other meeting formats that work in. Some of them have staff meetings, and they have the next day have like a follow-up meeting, so they wanted to use that. And we were going to really rely on these trained coaches and the teachers from last year to like lead this stuff. We would provide materials and supports, but it really would be up to them to do the rolling out of things most of the time. And then for other schools who are not ready, we're not ready for a full rollout, and this was 2 schools selected to say like, we're not really ready for this. Can we do a pilot again, like with more people, but through a PLC format? So we're going to have PLCs. We're going to ask staff to, you know, hopefully self-select, and we're going to have us with the people who were trained last year, if they're still there, which was not the case in every school, then we are going to have us do it together to run the PLC, because we don't think they can run the PLC entirely independently, but we are actively in process of meeting with schools now and talking through how this is going to look, and they all have kind of different ideas and things they want. And some want the same thing. Some like, I have this triangle that I made that has all of our like things in it, like, right, we have our, you know, our interventions and our prevention things. It's like their PBIS triangle, but it has all their stuff in it. They're like, could we add restorative practices? And I was like, absolutely. Like, we're absolutely going to do that, right? We're going to put these things in there. So we're helping to, and then one school hears it, they're like, wait, you're doing that for them? Can we have that too? Right? So we're doing those sorts of things. Some of them want, like, they send out like a weekly, you know, thing to newsletter to their teachers, and like, if you have can we give me video clips and other things and articles or little tips that I can send, I'll include that. Some of them want to try to get their kids involved, and that's going to be tricky. We're going to work on that. And so we are working on that individually with each school based on what they need. One school said, "Can you come and run a staff meeting for us?" And I was like, "Can't you do it?" But they're like, "No, can you please come?" And we're just going to do what we did in the training for the whole staff. So we did, when we did effective statements, it's hard if you're like not a person who's like, "I feel really frustrated right now because you're all talking and you're not listening, and I worked really hard on this lesson," right? If you're not that teacher, like those are hard to do, to make those effective statements. So we played a little game and we had an activity where we did that. So we're going to do that for them. So we were really working with them to come up with what makes sense in each of their schools to really make a difference. So that is really our next steps for this year as we go through. So we met with each school. We have a plan. I know that plan's not going to be 100%. I know that it's going to shift and change. But again, I think hopefully we can get a bunch of this rolled out to staff as we go. Okay, so we made it through our agenda and we're early. So here's our thank you. If you have any questions or need anything from us, this is where you can find us. And I will, and Jen and Liz too, we will field questions. So if anyone has any questions, let us know. If not, thank you so much for coming. We'll stay up here.